Kala pressed her scaled forehead against the cold metal floor of the execution chamber. Around her, the jeering voices of the Hegemony Council echoed off the pristine walls. Her people, the Genti, had fought bravely against the Galactic Empire, but their rebellion had failed. Now she knelt here, the last surviving member of her species' royal bloodline, waiting for the neural disruptor to end her life. The chamber fell silent as High Commander Vrex stepped forward. His insectoid features twisted into what passed for a smile among his kind. "Any final words, little princess?" he hissed, the translator in his throat making his voice sound like grinding metal. Kala said nothing. What was there to say? Her homeworld burned. Her people were enslaved or dead. The freedom fighters who had looked to her for leadership lay scattered across a dozen star systems. She had led them all to destruction with her foolish hope that the smaller species could stand against the hegemony's might. Nothing? Vrex circled her kneeling form. How disappointing. I expected more defiance from the last of the Genti royal house. Your ancestors were known for their fire. The other council members chittered and buzzed their approval. Representatives from a dozen conquered species, all eager to please their hegemony masters by witnessing the execution of another rebel leader. Kala closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's face, her father's voice. Anything from the time before the war consumed everything beautiful in her life. The neural disruptor hummed to life behind her. In moments, it would send a pulse directly into her brainstem, shutting down all neural activity instantly. A clean death, they called it. Merciful. As if there was mercy in genocide. Begin the... Vrex started to command, but his words were cut short by a new sound. Warning klaxons blared throughout the station. Red lights flashed, painting the execution chamber in bloody hues. What is the meaning of this? Vrex's mandibles clicked angrily as he activated his communicator. Security report! A panicked voice crackled through the device. Sir, we have intruders in Section 7. They've breached the outer hull. Security teams are responding, but the transmission cut to static. More alarms joined the cacophony. The lights flickered as something massive struck the station's hull. Through the chamber's viewport, Kala could see debris floating past, glowing orange from whatever weapon had torn through the station's armor plating. Impossible, one of the council members wheezed. No one would dare attack a hegemony execution station. The defenses alone. Sir, another voice burst through the communicator. Security teams report contact with unknown hostiles. They're unlike anything in our databases. The intruders appear to be bipedal mammals. They're using projectile weapons and some kind of explosive devices. Kala's heart skipped. Bipedal mammals? She had heard rumors during her imprisonment. Whispers among the guards about a new species that had somehow appeared on the galactic stage. A species that didn't follow the established rules of warfare. One that showed no fear of the hegemony's superior technology. Humans, they were called. The chamber door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the smoke and debris, figures moved with impossible speed and precision. They wore some kind of armor that seemed to absorb the chamber's lighting, making them appear as dark phantoms against the brightness. Hostile contact. Hostile contact! Vrex shrieked into his communicator while drawing his plasma sidearm. All units to the execution chamber. The lead figure raised what looked like a primitive kinetic weapon. The sharp crack of gunfire filled the chamber, as projectiles tore through two council members before they could even reach for their weapons. The rest scrambled for cover behind the ceremonial pillars that lined the room. Kala remained kneeling, too stunned to move. This was impossible. No rescue was coming. No one even knew she was here. Her capture had been kept secret to prevent any last-ditch rescue attempts by surviving Genti cells. Target the prisoner, Vrex screamed. Don't let them take her alive. A plasma bolt scorched the air above Kala's head. She closed her eyes again, expecting death from a different source than she had anticipated. But instead of the burning agony of plasma, or the quick darkness of the neural disruptor, she felt something else entirely, a gentle touch on her shoulder. Kala opened her eyes and found herself staring at a face unlike any she had ever seen. Pale skin covered with tiny scars, eyes the color of Earth's ancient oceans, and strangest of all, the creature was showing its teeth. Among every species she knew, bared teeth meant aggression, threat, dominance. But somehow, impossibly, this expression felt different, warm, encouraging. Look up, the human said in accented but clear galactic standard, his voice barely above a whisper, despite the chaos erupting around them. The translator struggled with the unfamiliar vocal patterns, but his meaning was clear. For the first time in months, Kayla lifted her head. The human's eyes met hers for just a moment before he spun away, his weapon barking fire at the hegemony forces. Kala watched in amazement as the creature moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so solid-looking. He rolled behind cover, came up firing, then leaped over a fallen pillar to engage two council guards who thought they had flanked him. "Marcus, we need to move," another human called out. This one was smaller, female by the sound of her voice, but no less deadly as she methodically picked off enemies with precise shots. "More security forces incoming from the north corridor." The human who had touched Kayla's shoulder, Marcus apparently, slammed a fresh magazine into his weapon with practiced ease. "Copy that, Sarah. Tommy, how's our exit looking?" A third human voice answered from somewhere near the destroyed doorway. "Path's clear for now, but I'm reading massive troop movements heading this way. Whatever we're doing, we need to do it fast." Marcus looked back at Kayla, who was still kneeling in the center of the chamber, paralyzed by the impossible scene unfolding around her. The neural disruptor lay in smoking ruins, destroyed by a precisely placed explosive charge. Frex cowered behind an overturned ceremonial table, occasionally poking his weapon up to fire wild shots that struck nothing but walls. "Can you walk?" Marcus asked, moving toward her in a low crouch while keeping his weapon trained on the surviving council members. Kayla tried to speak but found her throat too dry. She had been given nothing but minimal water for days before the execution. The stress of watching her rescuers fight an impossible battle against overwhelming odds had left her lightheaded. She managed a small nod. "Good enough." Marcus reached her side and began working on the neural restraint collar around her neck. The device was designed to prevent prisoners from using any psychic or enhanced physical abilities their species might possess. "This might hurt a bit." He produced a small device from his belt that looked like nothing more than a bent piece of metal with wires attached. The moment it touched the collar's lock mechanism, electricity arced between the connections. Pain shot through Kayla's nervous system, but it lasted only seconds before the collar fell away. "Ancient Earth saying," Marcus grunted as he helped her to her feet. "Sometimes you have to break a few locks to make an omelet." "I think you mean eggs," the female human Sarah called out while reloading her own weapon. "Whatever works." Marcus supported Kayla's weight as feeling returned to her legs. "Can you understand me clearly without the collar?" Kayla nodded. The collar had been doing more than preventing her abilities. It had been dampening her natural translation capabilities as well. Now she could hear the subtle emotional undertones in his voice, concern, determination, and underneath it all something that shocked her. "Hope. Why?" she whispered. "Why are you here?" Marcus checked his weapon's ammunition count while scanning the chamber for threats. Most of the council members were dead or hiding. Frex had gone silent behind his overturned table, probably calling for reinforcements rather than fighting. "Long story," he said. "Short version? We heard about your execution. Figured someone who had the whole hegemony scared enough to arrange a secret killing might be worth meeting. But your people, you're new to this galaxy. Why risk? Because someone has to." Marcus's expression hardened as the sound of marching feet echoed from multiple corridors. "And humans have never been good at minding our own business when bullies start picking on people who can't fight back." The simple honesty in his voice hit Kayla like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had shown such casual courage on behalf of her people? When had anyone risked themselves for strangers they had never met? "Princess," Tommy's voice carried urgent warning. "We've got company. Big company. I count at least 40 hostiles converging on our position." Sarah moved to the viewport and peered out at the station's corridors. "They're sealing off escape routes. Standard containment protocol. They want to trap us here." Marcus helped Kala steady herself against a pillar. She was stronger now, the effects of malnutrition and the neural collar fading as her enhanced Genti physiology began to recover, but she was still far from fighting condition. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something you need to know about this station." All three humans looked at her expectantly. "It's not just an execution facility. It's a research station. They've been experimenting on captured resistance fighters, trying to develop biological weapons specific to each species' genetics." She met Marcus's eyes. "If they activate the station's containment protocols, they'll flood every section with targeted toxins. I'm immune because of my royal bloodline, but your species, they might have something that could kill you in minutes. Marcus considered this for a moment, then did something that made Kayla's world shift slightly on its axis. He smiled again, that same baring of teeth that should have been threatening but somehow conveyed the exact opposite. Well then, he said, checking his weapon one more time, I guess we'd better make sure they don't get the chance. The station shuddered as more explosions echoed through its superstructure. Marcus pressed a small device to his ear, listening to rapid communication chatter that Kayla couldn't quite make out. His expression grew increasingly grim. How bad? Sarah asked, recognizing the look on her teammate's face. Bad. The hegemony fleet is moving to intercept our extraction ship. Captain Chen estimates we have maybe 20 minutes before they're forced to retreat, or risk losing the entire vessel. Tommy cursed in what Kayla assumed was their native language. The words were harsh, guttural sounds that seemed to carry significant emotional weight despite their unfamiliarity. There's another way out, Kayla said suddenly. All three humans turned to look at her. The research labs. They have independent atmospheric systems and emergency evacuation pods. If we can reach Lab Section C, there should be escape vehicles. Why didn't you mention this before? Sarah asked. Because Lab Section C is where they keep the live test subjects. Kayla's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Dozens of resistance fighters from multiple species. They're not in good condition. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Security forces were definitely closing in on their position. How many prisoners? He asked finally. I don't know exactly. Maybe 60? Maybe more. And they're all still alive? As of 3 days ago, yes. But the experiments... Kayla couldn't finish the sentence. The screams that had echoed through the station's ventilation system had been enough to tell her everything she needed. To know about what was happening in those labs, Tommy checked his ammunition count and shook his head. We can't fight our way through 40 guards, rescue 60 prisoners, and still make it to escape pods. That's not a mission, that's suicide. He's right, Sarah added. We came here for you specifically. Intel said you were the key to coordinating the remaining resistance cells. Trying to save everyone might mean saving no one. Marcus looked back and forth between his teammates, then at Kala. She could see him weighing options, calculating odds, making the kind of impossible decision that leaders were forced to make during wartime. What would your people do? He asked her. If the situations were reversed? If it was humans in those labs? Kala thought about her father, the last true king of the Genti, about the stories of his legendary courage during the early days of the hegemony's expansion, about the code of honor that had driven her people to fight a hopeless war rather than accept slavery. They would try to save everyone, she said, even if it meant dying in the attempt. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what I figured. He activated his communicator. Chen, this is Marcus. Change of plans. We're going to need a much bigger extraction. The voice that came back was tight with stress. Marcus, I've got 3 hegemony destroyers moving to attack positions. Whatever you're planning, it needs to happen now. Understood. Can you give us 30 minutes? I can give you 25 if I burn out our engines doing it. After that, we're all dead. 25 it is. Marcus ended the transmission and looked at his team. Sarah, I need you to find the fastest route to Lab Section C. Tommy, start rigging charges. If we're doing this, we're doing it loud. Sarah pulled out a handheld scanner and began mapping the station's internal structure. Got it. Lab Section C is 3 levels down past what looks like a major security checkpoint. We'll have to go through the main barracks to get there. The barracks will be empty, Kayla said. All security forces are being redirected to find us. But the labs themselves will be heavily defended. Automated systems, sealed blast doors, possibly combat drones. Tommy finished placing explosive charges around the chamber's entrance. I've got enough ordnance to make a very big mess, but we'll need to be smart about it. One wrong move and we could collapse this whole section. Marcus helped Kayla check the fit of a spare armor vest one of his teammates had brought. It was designed for human physiology and didn't fit her perfectly, but it would provide some protection. There's something else, she said as she adjusted the straps. If we free the test subjects, some of them won't be able to move on their own. The experiments, they've been testing neural manipulation, genetic modification, chemical warfare agents. Some of the prisoners might not even be fully conscious anymore. Then we carry them, Marcus said simply. Sarah looked up from her scanner. Marcus, be realistic. We're 3 people with limited ammunition facing potentially hundreds of enemies. Even if we reach the labs, how are we supposed to evacuate 60 disabled prisoners through hostile territory? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But we're going to figure it out as we go. The sound of approaching footsteps suddenly stopped. An eerie silence fell over the station section, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and life support systems. That's not good, Tommy muttered. A new voice echoed through the station's communication system. Frex had apparently found a way to access the general announcement network. Attention, intruders. You are completely surrounded. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Continue to resist and I will activate the biological containment protocols. You will die slowly and in great agony. Marcus looked at Kayla. How long does it take for those biological weapons to kill? For humans? I have no idea. Your species wasn't in their database when I was captured. Tommy grinned, an expression that looked remarkably similar to Marcus's earlier smile. Well, there's only one way to find out. No, Marcus said firmly. We're not gambling with toxins. We do this fast and clean. He activated his communicator again. Chen, we need a distraction. Something big enough to draw attention away from the lower levels. What kind of distraction did you have in mind? Marcus looked out the viewport at the massive hegemony fleet maneuvering around their position, the kind that makes them think twice about using biological weapons on their own station. The human ship appeared on the viewport like a predator emerging from shadow. Kala had never seen anything like it. Unlike the sleek, graceful vessels favored by most galactic civilizations, this ship looked like it had been built for war and nothing else. Angular, brutal, covered in weapons that seemed to have been added as afterthoughts to an already dangerous design. Chen, you beautiful maniac, Marcus whispered as he watched the ship open fire on the nearest hegemony destroyer. The exchange was brief but spectacular. The human vessel's weapons tore through the destroyer's shields like they weren't there, causing massive explosions across its hull. But the ship didn't linger to finish the job. Instead, it immediately changed course and began targeting the station's external weapon systems. What are they doing? Kala asked. They can't possibly fight the entire fleet. They're not trying to win, Sarah realized. They're making the hegemony choose between pursuing them and protecting the station. The communication system crackled to life again. This time it wasn't Vrek speaking, but a different voice entirely. Older, more authoritative, with the kind of calm that came from decades of military command. All units, focus fire on the intruder vessel. It must not be allowed to escape with intelligence about our research operations. Tommy grinned as explosions lit up the space around the viewport. There's our opening. While they're distracted by Chen, we move. Marcus led them out of the ruined execution chamber and into the station's corridors. The passageways were eerily quiet, confirming Kayla's prediction that security forces had been redirected to deal with the external threat. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow that made their shadows dance on the walls like ghosts. They moved quickly but carefully, with Sarah consulting her scanner at every intersection. The station was larger than it had appeared from the execution chamber, a sprawling complex of research labs, holding cells, and administrative sections that stretched for kilometers in every direction. I'm reading life signs 3 levels down, Sarah whispered as they approached a maintenance shaft. Lots of them. That has to be the prison section. Tommy had rigged a quick descent line that would get them down the shaft without using the main elevators. As they prepared to descend, Kayla caught Marcus's arm. I need to tell you something, she said quietly, about what we're likely to find down there. Marcus paused in checking his equipment. What is it? The hegemony's research methods. They're not just testing weapons. They're trying to understand how different species experience pain, fear, despair. Some of the prisoners we find might not want to be rescued. Their minds might be so damaged that they see us as another threat. Have you seen this yourself? Sarah asked. No, but I've heard the screams, and I've talked to guards who worked in the labs before they were assigned to me. They bragged about their work. Kayla's voice carried a hatred so pure it made the humans instinctively step back. They enjoyed describing what they were doing. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he began his descent into the shaft, speaking as he rappelled down the line. Then we'll have to be patient. Show them we're different. Prove that not everyone in this galaxy is their enemy. They descended through 2 levels of abandoned research facilities, laboratories full of equipment Kala didn't recognize, holding cells that still smelled of fear and suffering, medical bays equipped with restraints that looked more like torture devices than therapeutic tools. The third level was different. As soon as they emerged from the maintenance shaft, they could hear voices. Dozens of them, speaking in languages from across the galaxy. Some were crying. Others were screaming. A few were singing what sounded like funeral dirges. Movement sensors are going crazy, Sarah reported, checking her scanner. I count at least 70 life signs, but they're scattered across multiple cell blocks. This is going to take time we don't have. Tommy was already setting charges on the first set of blast doors they encountered. How do we know which cells contain prisoners and which contain guards? The guards will be the ones shooting at us, Marcus said grimly. The charges detonated with a controlled blast that sent the blast doors tumbling inward. Immediately, alarms began blaring throughout the level. Emergency lights flashed, casting everything in strobing red and white that made it difficult to see clearly. The first cell block they entered was almost too much to bear. Creatures from a dozen different species lay in cramped holding cells, many of them barely conscious. Some bore obvious signs of surgical modification. Others seemed physically intact but stared at nothing with the vacant expressions of minds that had been pushed beyond their breaking points. Sweet Mother Earth, Tommy whispered. Kayla moved to the nearest cell, where a young Zephyrian lay curled in a corner. The creature's natural luminescent skin had turned gray, and one of its wing arms had been surgically replaced with what looked like a mechanical prosthetic. It's okay, she said softly in Galactic Standard. We're here to help. The Zephyrian looked up at her with eyes that held no hope. More tests? It asked in a voice barely above a whisper. No more tests. We're taking you home. While Kayla worked on opening cell locks, Marcus and his team began checking the other cell blocks. Every room they entered revealed new horrors. Prisoners who had been subjected to genetic modification experiments, others who had undergone psychological conditioning designed to break their spirits completely. Marcus, Sarah called from across the cell block. We've got incoming. Security forces have figured out where we are. Through the destroyed blast doors came the sound of heavy footsteps and mechanical whining. Combat drones by the sound of it, followed by a full squad of hegemony soldiers. How many prisoners can move on their own? Marcus asked, helping a wounded Karathi to its feet. Kayla quickly surveyed the cell block. Maybe 20. The rest are too weak or too damaged. Then we carry the ones who can't walk and hope the ones who can walk stay with us. Marcus activated his communicator. Chen, please tell me you've got good news. The response came through heavy static. I've cleared a path through their fleet, but it won't stay clear for long. You need to get to those escape pods now. Tommy finished setting the last of his explosive charges throughout the cell block. I can buy us maybe 5 minutes with these. After that, this whole level is going to be crawling with hostiles. As if to emphasize his point, the first combat drone rounded the corner and immediately opened fire with plasma bolts that scorched the walls around them. Marcus returned fire while Kayla helped organize the prisoners who could walk. This is it, people. Time to find out what humans are really made of. The next 10 minutes became a blur of gunfire, explosions, and desperate courage that Kayla would remember for the rest of her life. The 3 humans moved through the rescue operation like they had been born for this exact moment. Marcus carried 2 unconscious Genti on his back while returning fire at pursuing drones. Sarah supported a wounded Karathi while using her sidearm to pick off enemies with impossible precision. Tommy brought up the rear, his explosive charges buying them precious seconds as pursuit forces struggled to navigate collapsed corridors and damaged bulkheads. But it was watching them interact with the freed prisoners that truly showed Kayla what made humans different from every other species she had encountered. When a Delrani warrior, driven mad by months of neural experimentation, suddenly attacked Marcus with its claws extended, the human didn't strike back. Instead, he caught the creature's arms gently but firmly and spoke to it in quiet, soothing tones until its panic subsided. When a group of young Zephyrians refused to leave their cells, terrified that this was another test, Sarah sat down on the floor with them and showed them pictures from her personal device. Images of Earth, of human children playing in gardens, of sunsets over mountains. Simple pictures that somehow conveyed the concept of home and safety better than any words could. When elderly Karathi prisoners collapsed from exhaustion, Tommy immediately rigged an improvised stretcher system using equipment harnesses and support beams, creating a way to transport them without leaving anyone behind. The escape pods are just ahead, Sarah called out as they reached the final corridor leading to Lab Section C's emergency systems. But I'm reading massive energy signatures. They've activated the automated defense grid. Through the corridor's transparent aluminum windows, Kayla could see the escape pod bay. Dozens of single-person emergency vehicles were docked and ready for launch. But between them and Salvation stood 3 combat drones, each one armed with enough firepower to level a small building. I can take them, Marcus said, checking his ammunition. But I'll need covering fire and someone to get the prisoners loaded into the pods. Negative, Tommy replied. Those drones are military grade. You go out there alone, you're dead in 30 seconds. Kayla looked at the freed prisoners huddled around them, 73 beings from 16 different species, most of them barely able to stand. All of them looking to her and the humans for leadership and hope. For the first time since her capture, she felt the weight of royal responsibility settling on her shoulders again. There's another way, she said quietly, but you're not going to like it. Marcus looked at her with those strange blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Tell me, the automated defense systems have a weakness. They're programmed to protect hegemony personnel and research assets, but they're also programmed to preserve the station's structural integrity. She pointed to a maintenance panel near the corridor entrance. If someone could access the environmental controls and trigger a catastrophic atmospheric breach, the defense grid would prioritize sealing the breach over engaging targets. Sarah ran calculations on her scanner. That would work, but whoever accesses those controls would be in the direct line of fire from all 3 drones. It's suicide. Not for me, Kayla said. I'm a royal. My genetic modifications include enhanced speed and reflexes. I could reach the panel, trigger the breach, and get back to cover before the drones could lock onto me. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. We came here to rescue you, not watch you sacrifice yourself. This isn't sacrifice. This is leadership. Kayla placed her hand on his shoulder, the same gesture he had used when he first told her to look up. My people are dead. My world is ash. But these prisoners still have homes to go back to. If I can get them there, then everything my people fought for means something. Tommy finished distributing the last of his ammunition among the prisoners who were capable of fighting. Princess, with respect, you've been locked in a cell for months. Your reflexes might not be what they used to be, Kayla smiled. It felt strange to use that particular human expression, but somehow it seemed appropriate. Only one way to find out. Before any of the humans could stop her, she sprinted down the corridor toward the defense grid. The drones detected her movement immediately, their targeting systems swiveling to track her progress. Plasma bolts scorched the air around her as she dove and rolled, using every piece of cover the corridor offered. Her father's training came back to her, as if no time had passed at all. The royal combat forms that had been drilled into her since childhood. The enhanced reflexes that were her birthright. The warrior's instinct that had driven her people to fight impossible odds. She reached the maintenance panel just as the drones achieved target lock. Her fingers flew across the control interface, accessing environmental systems that she had studied during her imprisonment. Emergency atmospheric breach protocols were buried deep in the station's safety systems, but she found them. Warning: catastrophic hull breach detected in Section C. All defensive systems, switching to containment mode. Warning: catastrophic hull breach detected in Section Sussy. The automated voice echoed through the corridor as the defense drones immediately shifted from attack mode to emergency response. Instead of firing at targets, they began sealing blast doors and activating atmospheric force fields. Now, Kala shouted, "Get them to the pods." Marcus and his team didn't hesitate. They began moving prisoners into the escape pod bay as quickly as possible, loading the emergency vehicles with anyone who could fit. The pods were designed for single occupancy, but they managed to squeeze 2 or 3 beings into each one. "Kayla, come on," Marcus called as he helped the last group of prisoners toward the pods. She was already running back down the corridor when the real security forces arrived. Not drones this time, but a full squad of hegemony shock troopers, armed with military-grade weapons and powered armor. Multiple hostiles escaping in emergency pods. One of them shouted into his communicator, "Request immediate interdiction." The first plasma blast caught Kayla in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into a bulkhead. The enhanced armor Sarah had given her absorbed most of the impact, but she could feel blood running down her arm. "Covering fire," Tommy yelled, and suddenly the corridor filled with the sharp crack of human projectile weapons. The shock troopers took cover, but their return fire was devastating. Plasma bolts melted chunks out of the walls and ceiling, filling the air with superheated metal fragments. Kala struggled to her feet and continued toward the pod bay. She could see the first pods launching, carrying precious cargo toward freedom, but she could also see that not everyone would fit. There were still a dozen prisoners in the bay and only 3 pods remaining. "This is it," Marcus said grimly, checking his weapon. He had maybe 10 shots left. "Tommy, Sarah, get the last prisoners loaded." "I'll hold them off. What about you?" Sarah asked. Marcus looked back at her, and once again Kayla saw that impossible human expression. The baring of teeth that somehow conveyed courage instead of aggression. "I'll improvise." Marcus stepped into the corridor with nothing but his remaining ammunition and what Kayla was beginning to recognize as uniquely human stubbornness. The shock troopers advanced in perfect formation, their plasma rifles charging for synchronized fire that would turn the corridor into a killing field. "Hey," Marcus called out in Galactic Standard. "You want to know what humans call this?" The troopers paused, confused by his casual tone. In the momentary silence, Kayla could hear the last escape pods launching behind her. "We call it Tuesday," Marcus said, and opened fire. What followed defied everything Kayla understood about military tactics and battlefield physics. Marcus moved through the corridor like liquid violence, using ricochets and deflections to make his limited ammunition count for far more than it should have. He rolled under plasma bolts, used the walls as launching points to change direction in midair, and somehow managed to disable 2 shock troopers with shots that seemed impossible from his position. But even human reflexes had limits. A plasma bolt grazed his leg, sending him stumbling. Another scored across his ribs, leaving a black line across his armor. The shock troopers pressed their advantage, advancing in a coordinated rush that should have ended the fight immediately. That's when Kayla realized something that changed her understanding of courage forever. Marcus wasn't trying to win this fight. He was trying to buy time. Every second he kept the troopers focused on him was another second for the escape pods to gain distance from the station. Every impossible maneuver that delayed their advance was another chance for the prisoners to reach safety. He wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to matter. "No," she whispered, then louder, "No." Kala charged back into the corridor, her enhanced speed carrying her past the shock troopers' line of sight before they could react. She struck the nearest one with a royal combat technique that sent him crashing into his companions, disrupting their formation just as Marcus's ammunition ran out. "I told you to get to the pods," Marcus shouted, drawing a combat knife as the remaining troopers recovered their balance. "And I told you this is leadership," Kayla replied, catching a plasma rifle as it spun away from a fallen trooper. For the first time since her capture, Kayla felt like herself again. Not a prisoner, not a broken rebel leader, but a daughter of the royal bloodline of the Genti. The weapon felt natural in her hands as she and Marcus fought back-to-back against overwhelming odds. "Princess Marcus, get down!" Tommy's voice echoed through the corridor. They dropped flat as a massive explosion tore through the section behind the shock troopers. Tommy had saved his biggest charge for last, bringing down half the corridor ceiling and trapping the surviving enemies under tons of twisted metal and debris. "That's the last of my toys," Tommy called out as he and Sarah emerged from the pod bay. "Whatever we're doing next, we're doing it with harsh language and creative thinking." Sarah checked her scanner. "All escape pods have launched successfully. They're clear of the station's defensive grid." "What about us?" Marcus asked, struggling to his feet. The plasma wound on his leg was bleeding freely now, and Kayla could see that he was favoring his left side where another bolt had found its mark. "That's a problem," Sarah admitted. "The last pods were the last pods. This bay is empty." Tommy examined the blast doors leading out of the section. "The good news is that my little explosion sealed off this area. The bad news is that it sealed off this area. We're trapped." Kayla looked around the empty pod bay, her mind racing through possibilities. The humans had sacrificed their own escape to ensure that every single prisoner made it to freedom. Not one of them had complained or suggested leaving anyone behind. "There might be another way," she said slowly, "but it's dangerous." "More dangerous than being trapped on a hegemony research station with no way out?" Marcus asked. "The station's main laboratory has experimental atmospheric craft, prototypes for planetary exploration missions. If we could reach Lab Section A, we might be able to steal one." Sarah consulted her scanner again. "Lab Section A is on the opposite side of the station. We'd have to cross through the main security hub, the command center, and at least 3 major checkpoints. With half the station's security forces looking for us, Tommy added. And no ammunition, Marcus pointed out. Kayla smiled again. That strange human expression that was becoming more natural to her. Like you said, Tuesday. They made their way through the damaged sections of the station, moving carefully to avoid patrols that were still searching for them. The explosion had caused more damage than Tommy had intended, collapsing several corridors and forcing them to take alternate routes through maintenance tunnels and service areas. As they traveled, Kayla found herself listening to the humans talk among themselves. Their conversation was casual, almost relaxed, despite their desperate situation. They shared stories about previous missions, joked about their current predicament, and showed genuine concern for each other's injuries. "How do you do it?" she asked Marcus as they paused to rest in an abandoned storage chamber. "Do what?" "Stay hopeful. Your people are new to this galaxy. You don't know most of the species you just rescued. You have no guarantee that any of those prisoners will survive to reach their homes. Yet you risked everything for them." Marcus was quiet for a moment, cleaning his combat knife with a piece of torn fabric. "My grandfather fought in something called World War II, one of the biggest conflicts in human history. I asked him once why he volunteered to fight when he could have stayed home safely. What did he say? He said that the moment you stop believing that people can be better than they are, you stop being people yourself." Marcus looked at her with those blue eyes that somehow held both sorrow and determination. "The hegemony has convinced half the galaxy that cruelty is strength, that dominating others makes you powerful. But we've learned something different. What's that? That the only power that matters is the power to lift others up. Everything else is just bullying." Before Kayla could respond, Tommy's urgent whisper interrupted them. "Movement. Big movement. Looks like they've figured out which direction we went." Through the storage chamber's transparent walls, they could see search teams moving through the corridors in systematic patterns. Dozens of soldiers, combat drones, and what looked like tracking creatures of some kind. "They're hurting us," Sarah realized. "Forcing us toward Lab Section A." "It's a trap," Marcus agreed. "They want us to go there." Kayla stood up, checking the plasma rifle she had taken from the fallen shock trooper. "It still had about half a charge remaining. Then we'd better make sure we spring it properly." Lab Section A was exactly what Kayla had expected it to be. A massive chamber filled with experimental aircraft, prototype weapons, and enough firepower to level a small moon. It was also, as Marcus had predicted, absolutely crawling with hegemony forces. High Commander Vrex stood in the center of the lab, flanked by 2 squads of his finest shock troopers and a collection of the most dangerous military hardware Kayla had ever seen in one place. Combat mechs, automated turrets, and floating weapon platforms that hummed with barely contained energy. "Welcome, Princess," Vrex called out as they entered through the only unsealed access point. "I was beginning to think you had lost your legendary Genti courage." The humans spread out slightly, taking what cover they could find among the experimental equipment. But it was clear that this was a fight they couldn't win through conventional tactics. "Let them go," Kayla said, stepping forward with her hands raised but still holding the plasma rifle. "Your quarrel is with me." Vrex's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. "My dear princess, you misunderstand the situation entirely. My quarrel is not with you. It is with them." He gestured toward Marcus, Sarah, and Tommy with one of his secondary arms. "These humans have done something unprecedented in galactic history. They have demonstrated that a technologically inferior species can successfully oppose hegemony forces through nothing more than primitive tactics and sheer audacity." "So?" Tommy asked. "We got lucky." "Luck?" Vrex moved closer, his insectoid features twisting with something that might have been respect. "You infiltrated a maximum security research station. You rescued 73 high-value prisoners. You fought your way through our best security forces, and you did it all with projectile weapons and chemical explosives that my people abandoned centuries ago." Marcus limped forward slightly, his combat knife still ready, despite the hopelessness of their situation. "Your point?" "My point, human, is that you have just proven that the hegemony's greatest strength is also our greatest weakness. We have become so dependent on advanced technology that we have forgotten how to fight with imagination and improvisation." Vrex's voice carried grudging admiration. "Your species fights like every battle might be your last. We fight like every battle should be easy." Sarah checked her weapon, knowing it was empty but going through the motions anyway. "So what happens now?" "Now I study you." I learn what makes humans different. And then I use that knowledge to ensure that no other species ever again surprises the hegemony as you have today. Kala felt a cold fury building in her chest, the same rage that had driven her people to fight a hopeless war rather than accept slavery. You're going to torture them, like you tortured the others. I am going to understand them, Vrex corrected. The neural mapping procedures are quite extensive, but they yield fascinating results. That's when Marcus did something that Kala would never forget as long as she lived. He started laughing, not the bitter laughter of despair or the manic giggling of someone who had lost their sanity. Just genuine, warm human laughter that echoed through the laboratory like music. You really don't get it, do you? Marcus said, still chuckling as he looked at the assembled forces surrounding them. Explain it to me, Vrex replied, clearly confused by this reaction. You think you can study us and learn to be like us, but being human isn't about tactics or technology or even courage. Marcus looked at his teammates, then at Kala, then back at Vrex. It's about choosing to care about people you've never met. It's about believing that everyone deserves a chance at freedom, even when helping them costs you everything. Fascinating, Vrex said. And how exactly does this philosophy help you now? Marcus smiled again. That same expression he had worn when he first told Kala to look up. Because we're not the only humans in the galaxy anymore. The laboratory's main viewport exploded inward as Captain Chen's ship materialized from what must have been an impossibly close-range jump. The vessel's weapon systems opened fire immediately, targeting the combat mechs and automated turrets with pinpoint precision that spoke of detailed intelligence about the station's layout. How? Vrex shouted over the chaos. We destroyed the intruder vessel? You destroyed a decoy, Sarah called back as she dove for cover behind a prototype atmospheric craft. Chen's been monitoring our progress through microtransmitters in our equipment. The moment we found what we were looking for, he came to get us. The laboratory became a war zone as human forces poured through the breached viewport. But these weren't the same 3 soldiers who had rescued Kala from the execution chamber. This was a full military team, armed with weapons that somehow managed to be both primitive and devastatingly effective. Kala, Marcus called over the gunfire. Can you pilot one of these atmospheric craft? She examined the nearest prototype. It was similar to vehicles she had trained on during her youth, but the controls were labeled in hegemony script. I think so, but where would we go? We're in the middle of space. Chen's ship has a docking bay large enough for small craft. If you can get us there, we can... A plasma bolt from one of the surviving turrets caught Marcus in the chest, sending him crashing into an equipment panel. Kala could see immediately that the wound was serious, possibly fatal. Without thinking, she abandoned her cover and ran to his side. Vrex saw the opportunity and raised his own weapon, targeting her as she knelt beside the injured human. Princess, Vrex called out. Your choice. Surrender now and I will allow the humans to die quickly. Kala looked down at Marcus, who was struggling to stay conscious despite the plasma burn that had charred his armor and the flesh beneath. His eyes found hers, and somehow he managed that impossible human smile one more time. Look up, he whispered. Kala raised her head and saw something that made her heart skip with sudden hope. The escaped prisoners' emergency pods had returned. All of them. Instead of fleeing to safety as any rational being would have done, they had somehow convinced Chen's ship to bring them back to the station. Through the communication system, a voice she recognized as belonging to the young Zephyrian from the first cell spoke in accented galactic standard. This is former prisoner. Designation 47. We understand there are still people trapped on this station who need help. More voices joined in. Korathi, Delrani, Genti, and dozens of other species all speaking at once. We're coming to get you. No one gets left behind. That's what the humans taught us. Vrex's weapon wavered as he stared at the viewport in disbelief. Impossible. They were free. Why would they return? Kala helped Marcus to his feet, supporting his weight as she looked at the hegemony commander with something approaching pity. Because someone showed them how to hope again, she said. And hope, Commander, is the one thing your empire never learned how to fight. The atmospheric craft's engines roared to life as Kala activated the startup sequence. Through the viewport, she could see dozens of emergency pods docking with Chen's ship, their former occupants joining human forces in the rescue operation that had somehow become a liberation. As they lifted off from the station's docking bay, Marcus managed to stay conscious long enough to see the result of their mission. 73 rescued prisoners were not just surviving, they were fighting back, teaching other species that resistance was possible, spreading the idea that freedom was worth any cost. Did we win? He asked weakly. Kayla looked out at the growing fleet of ships that had appeared around the station. Vessels from a dozen different worlds, all flying colors she hadn't seen since before the hegemony crushed the last organized resistance. I think, she said, adjusting course toward Chen's ship while keeping one hand on Marcus's shoulder. We did something better than win. What's that? We reminded the galaxy what it means to be free. 6 months later, Kala stood on the bridge of the Liberation Fleet's flagship, watching human and alien crews work side by side to coordinate the largest resistance operation in galactic history. The hegemony was finally facing an enemy they couldn't understand or defeat through superior technology. An enemy that fought not just for victory, but for the simple belief that every sentient being deserved the chance to look up at the stars and dream of something better. Marcus, fully recovered from his injuries, joined her at the viewport as they prepared to jump to their next target. Ready for another Tuesday? He asked with that familiar grin. Kayla smiled back, the expression now as natural to her as breathing. Lead the way, human. Lead the way.